Hey guys, how's it going today? Another video for you all today, and today I'm discussing my addiction to deck building. Alright, so I'm discussing my addiction, question mark, sort of, I guess, to deck building. It's one of those things in EDH, I think a lot of us really enjoy the whole process of getting a new commander deck. And I certainly really enjoy figuring out what I can do and what's going to fit in the deck, and sometimes it comes down to those last couple of cards, and you're going, what's a good 100 or 98th, 99th, and my 100th card, or whatever. Or you're going the opposite way, you're going, geez, I've got 105 cards here, and how am I going to cut down to 100, because most of these cards seem really good. And again, it's one of those things. It's just like that very zen sort of thing, I think. I guess that's one of the things that I think I find appealing. I love the intellectual sort of aspect to that degree, because I know and this comes from a long time, well, not really a long time, but a long time relatively of playing Commander and playing games with people, and that's what I want again at the end of the day. And I think that's what we all want, is to play our cool, fun, interesting decks against other people and see what they've brewed, because they're in the exact same position a lot of the times as us. They're going, wow, I think this sounds really cool, and I'm going to sit down and go, okay, how can I get to 100 cards? I need 3 more cards to get to 100 or whatever. Or, as I said, the same thing, oh, I've got 105 or 120 something cards or whatever, and I've got to cut down to the 100, and how can I make those cuts and whatnot. And that's the thing, I really enjoy it, and it's one of those things that is really fun and interesting about the format. And there's just nothing like Commander. There's just nothing like it out there in the world. And it's one of the best things out there, I think. And I think it's easy to say, again, it's quote unquote cardboard crack, but it is, in a sense, just a hobby. We're all, if you're watching my stuff here, for the most part, I often talk about EDH and whatnot. I often think that the channel maybe should just be strictly EDH stuff, but again, I like to talk about anime and gaming and all this other stuff, so I don't really want to do that. But yeah, anyway, it doesn't really matter for the most part right now. But again, I do have a bit of a problem sometimes, because, I get very sort of antsy or whatever, I guess, sometimes about going, or wanting to have my decks function differently. I don't want to build 5 decks that are all the same decks and everyone goes, oh, cool, this is another, deck that's basically the same deck except in different colors or whatever. And that's kind of what I had for a little while. I had 3 decks or whatever, maybe two real decks, and I was kind of building a 3rd deck. And I was starting to go, dude, wait a minute, this deck is basically the same deck as these other 2 decks, which is why I sort of slowly stopped building it to a degree. Because I wanted to change tactic. I wanted to go, wait a minute, I don't want to just build this deck to be the same deck as the other 2 decks that I've already got. And, it's a little bit much to already have 2 decks that are basically doing the same thing, which was, landfall tokens sort of strategy. And that's kind of one of the main strategies that I really like and really enjoy and really have fun with. But again, it was one of those little things where I was like, well, I really should just look at trying to figure out putting all my favorite sort of landfall token making sort of cards all into one deck, where I can just be like, okay, cool, this is my lands deck. This is the deck that, I play when I want to play that strategy, rather than having 3 different ones that are basically doing the same thing. but except, you know, different colours, because I had Taddy over for a little while, and I had what's her name? Not Oketra, whatever the devotion lady is. I've forgotten her name now. The green white one. I can't remember her name. Oh no, not Tristani. No, jeez, I'm not going to be able to think of it. But anyway, the Selesnya one was quite good as well. And I really enjoyed that. Again, like I enjoyed all the decks that I had, but again, I was kind of going, well, you know, what's the point of having 3 decks or even 2 decks that are all roughly doing the same thing? So I decided, you know what, I'm gonna pull, you know, the 2 sort of that one that I was building and one that I already had built apart, and then just like form them all into one deck. So now I've got a new 4 color deck, and I haven't had much success with 4 plus color decks, so I'm a little bit I don't know, but I've kind of gone, all right, well, wait and see. I haven't played it yet, so I'd like to play it soon. It is one of those things I can just go down to my LGS and play some games, which is, you know, really nice and really good, and, you know, don't have to worry about the COVID issues and whatnot down here in Launceston, you know. But it's one of those things. Again, you do have to do your check-ins, and, you know, you should theoretically sanitize. I try to sanitize as much as I can whenever I go to touch any products or whatever and whatnot, or if I'm handling products other people have held and things like that. Those are the times that I try to, you know, make sure I sanitize or whatever and whatnot, because those are the times, like if I'm touching the things that I always touch, it's like, well, what's the point? Like, or whatever. If I don't touch anything in the store, then it's like, well, what's the point to a degree? Because it's like, and especially when you go from one store to another and you just sanitize literally and your hands are still like drying from the sanitizer, it's like, well, what was the point of that? Like, to re-sanitize my sanitizing, I don't find that it's that useful. It's useful if you're touching stuff, or if you're, you know, handling other things that other people have handled, or someone wants to give you a fist bump or whatever, or, you know, those sorts of things. But anyway, getting off topic. Yeah, but deck building is one of those things. I think I sort of talked about deck building sort of in more of a, like, this is what I think you should do to do deck building. And again, it's one of those things. It's like suggestions and whatnot, or whatever, little tips and whatnot that I think are useful. I think, you know, again, like, I think that video, what is being proactive, kind of helps a lot, because that kind of also is about kind of deck building, or a deck building philosophy. And I really think a lot of people should take that deck building philosophy a lot more, because I just see a lot of people play a deck and then be like, wow, this deck just does nothing. Like, it has cards in it, and some of those cards are good cards, but there's nothing really going on. I have no real strategy. Like, all I'm doing is having all these random 2/4s or whatever and whatnot, and all of these weird random creatures that don't really do anything unless I have the few key cards that are in my deck. And how many tutors do I have to get to them? And again, I sort of say in that tutors video, I don't like to run tutors. I know some people like to run tutors, but again, I think it's sort of, you know, against the theory of the format where it's meant to be a 100-card singleton and that sort of thing. I know in reality it's not, because there's a lot of cards that basically do the same thing as a lot of other cards. There's like 3 or 4 cards that are basically the same as Llanowar Elves and whatnot. But again, it's one of those things where it's like, well, you're still running a 100-card singleton for the most part, and tutors sort of make it a lot more consistent to get basically your win condition 9 times out of 10 for the most part. But anyway, again, yeah. you know, in deck building, when you're like putting together a deck like this, and I was fixing up another one of my decks just while I was in town today, and I was like, this is my bird tribal deck, which I haven't really talked much about, but I started making it. Well, not I'm not gonna, I'm gonna say bird tribal, but it's not bird tribal. It's just flying tribal, and basically it has a bunch of things that fly in it, and a bunch of things that help you benefit from flying. I've got a Leela, artful provocateur, or whatever her name is, in as the commander. So it's Esper, an Esper deck. I have also tinkered a little bit with squirrels recently because I felt like I wanted more creatures in it, and I decided to put more shapeshifters in it because I felt like, well, they're temporary sort of cards in the deck that sort of are squirrels and can do something for the deck and whatnot. So I thought that'll help the deck out because it really feels creature light, and it still probably is a little bit too creature light, but again, you can't do too much about that. I could run all of the changelings or shapeshifters or whatever in that deck, but again, it wouldn't really sort of do much. And as I sort of said, in that, you've got to cut good cards tip there a little while back or whatever, that I've got like doubling season in that deck. Doubling season doesn't really do a whole lot because I don't have that many things that have +1 counters. I have like maybe one or two things that have counters, but that's about it. Maybe three, I don't know. But again, there's just not that much that gets counters or gives counters or whatnot and things like that. So it's like, well, counters is pretty irrelevant. And, double tokens is certainly nice, but again, it's a 1 in 99 because I don't have tutors for the deck, and I could put tutors in, but again, I don't really believe in it. But again, if I did, it'd still be like, well, another expensive card that's kind of just in the deck that sort of can do stuff kind of sometimes, but most of the time won't really do much because, again, the amount of times that you're actually going to have things that actually produce tokens, even though that is a more, heavily supported sub theme of the deck, it really isn't that big part of the deck. And again, you've just got all this sorcery speed, stuff that, makes squirrels for the most part. And if you never really get to like untap with your squirrels, or if you don't really get to draw any real cards with doing what you're doing with your squirrels, then it's kind of like, well, it doesn't matter if you got to untap with your squirrels. It's basically like you did get to untap with them if you never draw, a decent number of cards with them, because again, you're reliant on, keeping the chain going. And if you don't keep that chain going of like, I can draw 2 or 3 cards per turn, as soon as a wrath hits, or as soon as something happens, as soon as a couple of your squirrels die, especially some of the ones that actually anthem your squirrels, suddenly you're stuck with a whole bunch of 1/1 squirrels that just really can't get in there because you've only got like 3 or 4, maybe 5 of them. Even if you've got 10 of them, it's still not really that good because it's like, well, I've got 10 1/1s. So, and you just die to too many crackbacks and things like this when you're in positions like that. And if you can't recover from like some of these things, it just means you sit there and say, oh, okay, cool, well, that's probably the end for me. Like, it's one of those decks again, like, and in deck building, like, you want to take out these things where you go, well, the weakness of this deck is, removal and whatnot, but you can only do so much sometimes because it's like, well, I've drawn all the stuff that protects me from having my stuff removed, and I haven't drawn any of my stuff to actually that would be removed. So it's one of those processes of going, well, yes, all of these spells and whatnot are cool and good when you can utilize them, but when you can't utilize them, they're like, oh, okay, I've got 4 or 5 dead cards in my hand, so it's just like, oh, yep. So it's one of those things where it's like, oh, okay, well, I'll be sad then and sit over here and just wait for something to happen, or hope something can happen, or whatever, and that's about it. Like, again, so yeah. But again, yeah, I was working on my Esper Flyers deck there, as I sort of was saying. And yeah, I think that deck's pretty cool. And I think I was talking about Ornithopter of Paradise when it came out for Modern Horizons. I think I said something about it, but in this deck, wow, that's a really good card because again, it's a mana dork, it's a flyer, which again I want, plus it's an artifact. So those 3 things go really, really well in this deck. It's not like, oh my god, it's so broken or anything like that. It's just like, oh wow, this deck really loves this card because, it fits 3 things basically that I want or need. I need mana rocks, and I need my mana rocks to tap for most of my colors because again, there's not a huge amount of fixing. Sometimes I can get plains pretty easily, but I can't get swamps and islands too easily a lot of the time. So that's a problem. So you just kind of hope that you can like eventually get there and whatnot, and eventually draw yourself into it and whatnot, or at least thin your deck by cutting as many planes and whatnot from the deck, and then you're left with swamps and islands, hopefully as much as possible. So cards that are like that are really good because they serve not just one purpose, but they serve 3 purposes. If it's not being used as a mana rock, then it's just being used as a flyer that the deck wants and probably needs. Not that there's a low amount of flyers in the deck, that's basically all flyers, but again, when you need a couple more flyers just to get lethal on the table and things like that, it's really good because it's like, oh, okay, I don't need it for mana this turn or whatnot, and I'd much rather use it for mana or for an attack or whatever, or whatever. The opposite is also true, like I said, but again, and then if your commander's already out, it's like, oh, okay, cool, it's 2 flyers for the price of 1, essentially, because my commander will make a fairy or whatever. So that's really good. But if your commander's not out, it's like, oh, okay, cool, I can power my commander out, a little bit, quicker or whatever. Even if your commander's died, it's like, oh, okay, cool, I'll just tap this thing, maybe, or whatever, to get it back out, help pay for that commander tax or whatever, and I can still leave up some of my other colours of mana, whatnot, if I need them, especially when, you're being bared down on by some nasty opponent's creatures, which happens. But the best thing about like a Flyers deck I find is that almost everyone is very ill-equipped to deal with Flyers. It's nothing busted or broken, but flying is just so like it's one of those things. Almost everyone's just going, "Oh my god, what can we do? We can't stop the Flyers." It's just like one of the most funny, silly things that it's just like, why don't people have any like reach or whatever, or any flyers of their own? But this is one of the things that I often, or even now, have done is like, wow, I really need something for flyers, because any time that I come up against a deck that's like mine, I go, yep, geez, I need more reach, dude, or something, like, how can I get rid of flyers? I realized that pretty quickly because it was like one of the things is like, Yes, flyers will kill me if I do not have enough, reach or whatever blockers or whatnot, or flying removal or whatnot, because flyers are so good. They're very evasive. It's very hard to deal with them for the most part, unless you're prepared to face them. So yeah, I just think having a flying deck is often kind of a little bit of a cheese, but it's one of those things. Again, it's another aggro deck for the most part, where it's like, well, at least I can actually get my damage in more easily, and it's one of the more relevant, sort of ways to do it, kind of, I guess. But it's one of those things. It's where like, oh, okay, cool, it is a bit top heavy sometimes, whatever, to a degree, because a lot of the big sphinxes and whatever else, or a lot of the good sphinxes or whatever else are big sphinxes, so you've got to have a lot of mana and whatnot and things like this. But I do notice that as far as what I've played it, which I have played a little bit, is that it's a very mana giving deck for being in Esper colors. It's funny to look at it and be like, oh, okay, cool, I've got 50 something mana. Well, not literally, but again, I've got a lot of mana. And do I have much to spend it on? No. All right. So I need more cards. But that's one of the things about it, as well, as like it does draw a lot of cards, because again, you've got all these effects that whenever you hit players and whatnot, you draw cards. And again, since you're not being able to be blocked, it's like, wow, cool, I just hit everyone for damages or whatnot, and I draw some cards, cool. And your commander also just like buffs up your flyers, so like, again, you're just doing that extra little bit of damage, and your life totals suddenly are pretty low after a couple of turns. It's like, oh, okay, cool, suddenly you're in the driver's seat, and that's really cool. But like, this is my problem again. Like, this is where I'm sitting currently, and my problem is I'm going, well, I want to build one more deck, but I just don't quite know what it is. And I'm kind of sitting on thinking about what I should build. And that's my problem as well, is I probably will build something and then not really like it, because this is the problem. I just don't know. Like, I want a direction, and this is what I often try to do and often try to say to people again, is trying to find something you like is often can be difficult, and something that you'll be happy to keep playing and playing and playing is often sometimes difficult, and your opponents will find to be oh yes, it's doing its own thing and in whatnot, and I've got to deal with it at some point or whatever, or maybe I have to deal with it now. Holy crap, I'm about to die, or whatnot. But again, it's just like, oh, okay, cool. I can play my deck and you can play your deck, and we all can have fun and do what we're doing, and have fun, enjoyable games. I always want to build my decks in that way, or even if somebody goes, wow, cool, this is a really cool, landfall deck. Wow, you're doing so much. Like, I wish I had that deck or whatever, or I wish I'd built that deck. It seems really cool and fun, and like all this, or wow, you've got so many squirrels on the field suddenly. Wow, whatever. Like, I wish I had, a squirrel tribal deck or whatever. That seems cool or whatever. Like, I want my opponents to, be fun, having fun with my deck as well. Like, I want to have fun with their deck sometimes as well. I want to go, wow, such and such just made, whole bunch of, zombies or whatever, or, whatever they did. They made 50 treasures or whatever. Not from Dockside Extortionist, but from something else or whatever, something random, like, somehow, whatever. They did a thing, and that's cool. Wow, like, we might have to deal with them having 50 treasures or whatever, but wow, it was cool that they did that, and that's a cool little synergy that they found or whatever, or a new card that they put in or whatever recently, and wow, that card does some work. Wow, I think I might have to find a place in one of my decks somewhere for that because it's really good and whatnot. So yeah, maybe I should find some space for that. But again, it's one of those things where it's like everyone has their own little things that they like, and everyone can do their own little things, and we all can, appreciate something different from each, person's deck or whatnot, and we can all have fun. So that's what, like my deck building is all about a lot of the time, as sort of said. But again, my deck building problem is more so just like trying to like find ways to keep that going, essentially. Is like, okay, if I'm gonna build something, and again, it's one of those hobbies where you've got to invest a fair amount of money into it. And like again, I do have a lot of cards and whatnot, so it's not like I can't just sit there and go, okay, well, I have all of these cards, so maybe I should do something with them, but what specifically? And it's like, well, I already have, all these other decks that are, taking up a lot of my other colors and a lot of my other, like, good, like, dual lands and things like this. So I'm kind of like going, well, I might want to just, like, relax it a little bit and try and find something else. I was actually thinking about a colorless deck for, like, 5 seconds. And then I was like, nah, I don't think that that's actually like that good. It's too restricted. And again, like I think monocolored again is a little bit too restricted. That's just me. I just find that eventually you start going, well, it's in my colors and it'll fit, kind of. And I think you just like, even though there's several, decades of Magic or whatever, a couple of decades of Magic, it's like there's just not quite enough really good cards that actually would fit into this deck, really. Like I'm really running thin on like actually like decently good cards. And just like, oh, okay, great. Like I've got to fill it out with or fill it out with a couple random creatures that don't really fit in the deck, but I've run out of actual good creatures or whatever, or I've really got enough lands for what the deck's doing and whatnot, and I've got enough removal, got enough board wipes, got enough card draw, got enough ramp. So it's just like, well, I just need some more enablers or some more creatures or something, or some more recursion or whatever, or something like that, because there's not much else that I could put in there. Again, like, you could put more tutors, but again, it's just one of those things that I don't, but whatever. It's like, again, unless you've got the money for them as well, it's like, well, I might have the money for them, but again, I don't want to spend 50 something dollars just on a tutor or whatever. It's like, no, please, can I not? And then it's like, oh yeah, there are some tutors that are 4 or 5 mana or whatever and are like 25 cents, but at that rate, you're just like, well, I don't want to spend 4 mana to find a spell. Like at that point, I'm just like, well, I'd rather draw 4 cards or whatever, or whatever, like that'd be better, at this cost, it'd be just like better to straight up draw 4 cards, and then even then it's like, oh well, it'd be better if I actually had a card that was like draw 4 cards every turn, like an enchantment or something. So again, it's a lot of these little things. It's where it's like, oh, okay, yep, there's just not like impactful enough, or does enough, quickly enough or whatever, or there's too much of a downside to it doing what it's doing, things like that. So you often find things like that and go, well, yep, this is the predicament that I'm in. Like, I think, about to say Sensei's Divining Top, but I think that could be in the argument. But again, like, Sylvan Library is one of those cards that it's just like, yeah, it doesn't really do enough right away. Yeah, it doesn't have to do a lot because it's a lower investment. But again, like brainstorming kind of the top cards of your library, every turn, I don't know. Like, unless you're actually paying the 4 life for a couple of those cards every turn, it's not that good. And then it's just like, well, is 4 life? 4 life is too much for these cards unless I'm like playing in a very highly competitive like way, or I've got a lot of life gain or whatnot, things like this. So it's just like, well, even though it's powerful for what it does when it actually does its thing, you can draw 4 cards or 3 cards or whatever for 8 life or whatever. But again, it's like, well, do I really want to do that? Especially in like something like squirrels, it's like, well, I either die from having losing my own life just to find more cards, or whatever. So it's just like, well, and again, there's not much life gain, so it's like, well, I'm not going to do that. Plus, there's so much other stuff that actually makes you lose life as well. So it's just like, well, that just like puts it onto the side. But again, you're just like very desperate for like, and this is another thing about like deck building. You've got to go, okay, like, why am I not putting this in? It's a really good card, but you've got to look at it and go, well, I've already got all this stuff that makes me lose life, and there's not much way of me putting much life gain in the deck because I'm not in colors that have life gain naturally or whatnot, or there's not really enough real good cards to warrant putting it in, things like that. So again, like, you're always thinking, going, well, why is this card out? This card is out because it only does something, once, during your upkeep, which is, 1/4 of the upkeeps in the game. Again, maybe if you have like double upkeeps and things like this, maybe it gets a little bit better, but again, it doesn't do anything right away. Yes, it's 2 mana and whatnot, but the life loss, unless again you're in a very highly competitive sort of area and you just like need the cards. Like, again, it's one of those things, like, if you play it, you might not even get to your next turn in those formats. So it's like seemingly like meant to be good, but I don't know how good it is. But it's one of those cards you just look at and go, well, in those formats, can you take the actual time off, because the game's going to be over in in very few turns and in very few amount of time. So you really got to have like counter spells and other things like to back that up. You can't just tap out and be like, okay, cool, everyone have free reign after this. But anyway, like, I've been rambling for a little while about my deck building problem and whatnot, and all my decks that I'm currently fiddling with and doing stuff with and all that. So I think I better stop chattering away here. A bit more of a, just like, we're having a bit of a chat, or maybe a bit more podcasty sort of like episode here, but I know like some people won't tune into every single one of these episodes because they're like not super duper like clickbait, whatever, like things or whatnot, or that interesting. But this is where I'm at. Like, this is what I want to talk about just here on this specific one. So, this is what I'm talking about. But if you did enjoy it, I would love to hear from you. You can let me know if you did like it, thought it was, thought provoking, because I did again go through a few tips and tricks and whatnot, a little bit, not too much again, but a little bit, about like thinking about like, why am I doing this, like, why am I doing that, like, and whatnot. So you can let me know all your thoughts, write them down there in the comments below. I will be sure to try to get back to all of you. I really enjoy and appreciate anyone that does comment. hey, you've just finished watching one of our videos. A bunch of other videos are popping up on your screen now for you to check out, so why not check them out?